Coca-Cola is a global powerhouse with a brand value worth nearly $100 billion that dominates the beverage industry in virtually every corner of the earth, selling over 2 billion servings of their products every single day to people in more than 200 countries. And yet, behind the iconic red and white script and the refreshing fizz of a cold bottle lies a dark story of addiction, desperation, and tragedy involving a humble pharmacist who created the world's most famous drink, while desperately trying to cure his own crippling morphine dependency. To understand how this empire was built, we must travel back to 1831 to a quiet, rural community in Knoxville, Georgia, where a young boy named John Pemberton grew up, surrounded by cotton fields and farmland, but found himself captivated not by agriculture, but by the mysterious world of chemistry and medicine. While his peers were content with the manual labor of farm life, young Pemberton spent his childhood fascinated by glass vials, chemical compounds, and medicinal herbs, dreaming of a future where he could heal people through the power of pharmaceutical science. Just like the humble farm boy who created Lamborghini or the blacksmith's son who built Ferrari, Pemberton possessed an early obsession with his craft that would one day lead him to create something extraordinary, though the path would be marked by devastating personal tragedy and unimaginable suffering that would ultimately cost him everything he had worked for. John Pemberton was born on July 8, 1831, in Knoxville, Georgia, at a time when the American South was heavily dependent on agriculture and formal medical education was a luxury available only to the wealthy. Despite his family's modest means, Pemberton was determined to escape farm life and pursue his passion for pharmacy. After graduating from the Southern Botanico Medical College of Georgia in the early 1850s, Pemberton established himself as a respected pharmacist and chemist, opening his own drug store where he spent countless hours experimenting with plant extracts and herbal remedies. He quickly gained a reputation as one of the most skilled pharmacists in Georgia, creating popular products like Indian queen hair dye and triplex liver pills that sold well throughout the region. By his 30s, Pemberton had built a successful business and was living comfortably with his wife Eliza and their son Charles. However, everything was about to change when the American Civil War erupted in 1861, plunging the entire nation into a brutal conflict that would leave the economy in ruins. In May 1862, at age 31, Pemberton enlisted in the Confederate Army as a lieutenant colonel. During one of the war's final campaigns in April 1865, just weeks before the Confederacy's surrender, Pemberton was severely wounded by a saber slash across his chest that left him in excruciating pain. Like thousands of wounded soldiers, he was treated with morphine, a powerful painkiller that was commonly used despite its highly addictive properties. What started as legitimate medical treatment quickly spiraled into a crippling addiction that would torment him for the rest of his life. When the war ended and Pemberton returned to Georgia, he found himself haunted not only by combat trauma, but by an insatiable craving for morphine he could not control. The post-war South was devastated, with its economy shattered and widespread poverty affecting millions. For Pemberton, who was now struggling with both physical pain and morphine dependency, the future looked impossibly bleak. But instead of giving in to despair, he made a fateful decision to use his pharmaceutical skills to search for a cure. To find some medicine that could relieve his suffering without the devastating effects of morphine addiction. Pemberton buried himself in his laboratory, spending months of restless nights experimenting with plant extracts and chemical compounds, desperately searching for a solution. During this period, he became particularly interested in coca leaves, a South American plant that had been used for centuries to combat fatigue and relieve pain. Coca leaves contained cocaine, which was being widely promoted by European physicians as a miracle cure and was completely legal at the time. Pemberton became convinced that coca held the key to overcoming his morphine addiction, and he began incorporating coca extract into various medicinal tonics. By the early 1880s, he had moved to Atlanta, a rapidly growing city emerging as the commercial center of the New South. There, Pemberton developed a formula combining coca leaf extract with African cola nut, which contained caffeine along with wine, creating a beverage he called Pemberton's French wine coca. The drink was marketed as a medicinal tonic that could cure everything from headaches to morphine addiction, and it quickly became popular among Atlanta's middle and upper classes. Sales were respectable, and for a brief moment, Pemberton had finally found success. However, little did he know his world was about to be turned upside down once again. In 1886, the temperance movement swept through Georgia with tremendous force. Atlanta and Fulton County voted to implement Prohibition laws banning alcoholic beverages, which meant Pemberton's wine-based tonic would soon be illegal and his business destroyed overnight. Facing immense stress and the prospect of losing everything, Pemberton made a desperate decision to reformulate his product, removing the wine and creating a non-alcoholic version that could be sold as a soda fountain drink. He worked frantically to perfect the new formula, adjusting the proportions of coca extract, cola nut, sugar, and various flavorings until he achieved a taste that could succeed in the competitive soda fountain market. According to legend, on a warm afternoon in May 1886, Pemberton carried a jug of his new syrup to Jacob's Pharmacy, one of Atlanta's most popular soda fountains. There, the pharmacist mixed the syrup with carbonated water, and the first glass of what would become Coca-Cola was served for 5 cents. Pemberton's bookkeeper and partner, Frank Robinson, suggested the name Coca-Cola, reasoning that the two C's would look good in advertising. And using his elegant Spencerian script penmanship, he created the distinctive flowing logo that remains virtually unchanged today. Robinson also wrote the first newspaper advertisement appearing in the Atlanta Journal on May 29, 1886, describing it as delicious, refreshing, exhilarating, invigorating. However, despite their optimism, the business struggled immensely. Pemberton spent approximately $73 on advertising, but the company sold only about 25 gallons of syrup, generating $50 revenue, which meant they actually lost money in their first year. Unfortunately for Pemberton, his morphine addiction had destroyed both his health and his finances. He was constantly borrowing money, and his deteriorating condition made it impossible to manage the business. By 1887, desperate for cash to support his drug habit and pay mounting debts, Pemberton began selling off portions of his ownership in Coca-Cola for whatever meager sums he could get. In a series of complicated transactions, Pemberton sold shares to at least four different people, creating a confusing mess of overlapping ownership claims. The most significant sale was to Asa Candler, a shrewd Atlanta businessman who recognized Coca-Cola's potential even though it was barely profitable. Between 1888 and 1891, Candler systematically bought out all other shareholders, eventually gaining complete control for a total investment of approximately $2,300, an amount that seems absurdly small considering the company would one day be worth tens of billions. Tragically, John Pemberton never lived to see any of this success. Weakened by years of morphine addiction and suffering from stomach cancer, Pemberton died in poverty on August 16, 1888, at age 57, just 2 years after creating Coca-Cola. He was buried in an unmarked grave in Atlanta's Linwood Cemetery, a tragic end for the man whose formula would become the most recognizable beverage in human history. Asa Candler, however, possessed exactly the business acumen that Pemberton had lacked. He understood that Coca-Cola needed to become a national brand that people would actively seek out by name. Candler invested heavily in advertising, distributing thousands of promotional items including calendars, clocks, serving trays, and coupons for free drinks, ensuring the Coca-Cola name was visible everywhere. He also pioneered the distribution model that would become the foundation of global success, selling concentrated syrup to independent bottlers who would add carbonated water and distribute the finished product throughout their territories. By the turn of the century, Coca-Cola was being sold in every state in America, and the company's annual advertising budget had grown to over $100,000, an astronomical sum for that era. During the early 1900s, the company faced its first major crisis when government regulators raised concerns about cocaine content in Coca-Cola. Although the amount was extremely small, growing moral panic about drug use forced Coca-Cola to completely remove cocaine from the formula by 1903, replacing it with spent coca leaves that preserved the flavor but contained no active cocaine. Throughout the following decades, Coca-Cola continued its explosive growth, surviving the Great Depression by positioning itself as an affordable luxury for just a nickel. But the company's most brilliant marketing move came during the Second World War, when Coca-Cola President Robert Woodruff committed that every American soldier serving overseas would be able to buy a Coke for 5 cents regardless of the cost to the company. This patriotic gesture, which cost millions in subsidies and required building 60 for bottling plants near military bases worldwide, transformed the drink from an American product into a global symbol of freedom and optimism. When soldiers returned home, they brought their Coke drinking habits with them, and the company found itself with a massive customer base and bottling infrastructure on 6 continents. By the 1950s and 1960s, Coca-Cola had become the undisputed king of the soft drink industry, though it faced fierce competition from arch-rival Pepsi, whose aggressive marketing challenged Coke's dominance. The rivalry reached its peak in the 1980s when Coca-Cola made one of the most infamous marketing blunders in business history. In 1985, facing declining market share, the company introduced New Coke, a reformulated version abandoning the original 99-year-old recipe. The public backlash was immediate, and overwhelming, with loyal customers stockpiling old Coke and protest groups demanding the return of the original formula. After just 79 days, the company brought back the original recipe as Coca-Cola Classic, and the new Coke disaster became an expensive lesson in brand loyalty. Ironically, the controversy actually strengthened Coca-Cola's brand by demonstrating how passionately consumers loved the original formula. Today, the Coca-Cola Company is valued at nearly $300 billion and sells over 2 billion servings daily in more than 200 countries, making it one of the most valuable and recognizable brands on earth. The company has expanded far beyond its signature cola to un mort en flavored beverage break, Fanta, Minute Maid, and Dasani, touching virtually every segment of the non-alcoholic beverage market. Yet despite all this corporate success and global dominance, the origin story remains forever linked to the tragic figure of John Pemberton, a humble pharmacist who created the world's most famous drink while desperately trying to cure his own morphine addiction. Pemberton died penniless and largely forgotten, never knowing that his formula would one day be worth billions or that his name would be remembered in the history of American business. This is the bittersweet story of how a wounded Civil War veteran and struggling drug addict created Coca-Cola, proving once again that even the most successful empires can be built from the darkest moments of human suffering, and that innovation often comes from the most unexpected places. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to subscribe and like the video, and I'll see you in the next one.